The elevator dinged on the 42nd floor, and I stepped out, heels clicking against the polished marble like a warning. Midtown never slept, they said, but this floor felt alive in a way that wasn't comforting. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of roasted coffee, and the low murmur of early morning conversations all wrapped around me. Like I had walked straight into a predator's lair wearing nothing but confidence as armor. I smoothed the front of my blazer, taking a deep breath. I had been here before. Countless Mondays, countless meetings, countless reminders that my presence here, as a black woman in a predominantly white corporate hierarchy, was always a subtle performance. One wrong word, one missed cue, and suddenly I wasn't competent. Suddenly I was too aggressive, or not team-oriented. But today felt different. Today, something had shifted. The conference room door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the low hum of familiar voices. My team, scattered around the oval table, looked up as I entered. A polite nod here, a half-smile there, but my eyes immediately sought him. Victor Hale. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled like a judge about to deliver a verdict. His gaze met mine for a brief second, then flicked away, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. I knew that smirk. I had seen it before. It meant he thought he had the upper hand. That today, my voice would be drowned, my ideas dismissed, my worth questioned. And yet, there was fire in me I hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the strategic spot where no one could ignore me, yet far enough that I could observe the battlefield unfolding. Across from me, Malik, one of the few black men on the team, gave me a subtle nod. Just a nod, but in it, I read solidarity. He knew, we all knew what it felt like to walk into this room. Brilliant on paper but constantly underestimated, constantly overlooked. Victor cleared his throat, and the room went silent. Let's get started, he said, eyes briefly scanning a sheaf of papers. Though I knew he had already made his decisions weeks ago. The meeting was a show, a stage set to assert his dominance. And for the first time in months, I wasn't here just to play along. I was here to witness, to gather, to prepare. He started outlining the new project assignments. His voice calm, almost casual, but beneath that calm was a weight, a calculated intent, and then it came. The subtle knife twist I had been expecting. Latoya, he said, his eyes not meeting mine. We've decided to reassign your team for this quarter's client. You'll take on the smaller accounts. The room froze, a few polite nods, a few murmurs of acknowledgement, and there I sat, a tight smile plastered on my face, heart pounding like a war drum. Smaller accounts, less visibility, less recognition, less credit. I forced a laugh, a sound that didn't quite reach my eyes. Of course, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm building inside me. Victor continued, oblivious to the magnitude of his action, talking over the next 30 seconds like nothing had happened. But I was already outside the words. Outside the room, my mind raced. Every injustice I had suffered here. Every time my ideas were co-opted by someone else. Every subtle comment about fitting in, or knowing my place, flashed before my eyes. I clenched my fists under the table. Not out of anger, not yet, but as a reminder. A reminder that I had survived worse. That I had risen before. And that this was just the opening move. Malik leaned over and whispered, they've done it before. They'll do it again. Don't let them see it break you. I nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't need to say more. We shared an understanding forged from countless overlooked promotions. Countless ignored reports. Countless reminders that as black professionals, we often had to fight twice as hard for half as much recognition. The meeting dragged on, each slide a reminder of my supposed downgrade, but my eyes kept scanning. Not for Victor's approval, not for anyone's, but for the fragments of opportunity hidden in the chaos. Every spreadsheet, every client note, every small oversight by the leadership team, I catalogued them all. This wasn't just about survival. This was reconnaissance. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting adjourned. People stood, stretched, murmured small talk, and slowly the room emptied. Victor left last, giving me a parting glance that said, clearly, you don't matter. I stayed seated, letting the silence envelop me, letting the hum of the office remind me that I wasn't alone. The quiet was my ally now. My thoughts, my memories, my anger, they were all ammunition. I thought of my mother, who had worked 3 jobs to send me to a good school, who had told me, over and over, "Latoya, they will try to dim your light. Don't let them." I felt that fire again. Deep in my chest, I had been dimmed, yes, but never extinguished. Not by Victor, not by anyone. I pulled out my notebook, the one I used for keeping track of everything: contacts, insights, minor victories. I wrote, "This is the beginning. Watch closely." And as I looked up at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below me like a map of endless possibilities. I made a silent promise. They would see. Victor would see. The company would see. And the people who had been overlooked, underestimated, silenced, they would see too. Because this wasn't just about one promotion, one client, or one petty slight. This was about recognition, respect, justice, and most of all, survival. I stood, shoulders back, heart racing, eyes sharp. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to the battles waged inside conference rooms like this. But inside me, a plan had already started to take shape, a plan to turn their arrogance against them, to reclaim what was mine, and to ensure that my voice, and the voices of those like me, would never be ignored again. As I stepped back into the corridor, the echo of my heels felt different this time. Not uncertain, not hesitant, purposeful, defiant. And for the first time that morning, I smiled, not the polite, controlled smile of a black woman navigating corporate expectations, but the private, knowing smile of someone who had just taken the first step toward change. The elevator doors opened, and the reflection staring back at me wasn't just Latoya, the underestimated analyst. It was Latoya, the observer, the strategist, the storm quietly gathering strength. And they had no idea what was coming. The office had emptied faster than usual, leaving behind the faint hum of the AC and the occasional click of a keyboard from someone burning the last minutes of overtime. I stayed at my desk, not because I had work piling up, but because leaving now felt like admitting defeat, and defeat was not part of my vocabulary. I opened my laptop, pretending to review the day's tasks, but my mind wasn't on deadlines or deliverables. My mind was on patterns, Victor's patterns. His little smirks, the way he assigned teams, the clients he favored, the moments he undermined others while looking like a benevolent leader. Every move, every glance, every calculated smile. It was all data, all fuel for the fire I was beginning to build. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee and let my gaze drift toward the skyline again. Midtown's skyscrapers gleamed in the late afternoon light, indifferent to the micro-battles waged inside offices like mine. But for me, this city was a chessboard, and I was starting to see the first few moves. It wasn't about revenge yet, not the kind that burns bridges and leaves chaos in its wake. Not yet. First, it was about observation, about understanding who was loyal, who was opportunistic, who could be swayed, and who could not. The people I would need, the people I could trust, they were here somewhere. I opened a new document, titling it, Victor Hale, Behavioral Patterns. Each detail mattered: his tendency to talk over people in meetings, his habit of delegating credit to others, his subtle undermining of women of color on the team. Patterns that, when connected, painted a portrait of arrogance and vulnerability. And vulnerabilities, I reminded myself, were weapons waiting to be wielded. As I scrolled through emails, I noticed the usual: Victor micromanaging trivial tasks, congratulating the same few individuals, leaving others overlooked. I highlighted, tagged, made notes. It felt almost ritualistic, methodical, and as I did, a strange calm settled over me. Observation wasn't passive, it was preparation. And preparation gave power. Then Malik appeared at my desk, leaning casually against the cubicle wall. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked. Though I knew it wasn't about the time. It was about being seen. About solidarity. "Just strategizing," I replied, my voice quiet, careful. He nodded, understanding immediately. "He's sloppy, overconfident. That's the thing about people like him. They think they can't be outmaneuvered. But they always leave a window open. I smiled faintly, feeling the first spark of partnership in this silent war. Malik wasn't just a colleague, he was an ally. Someone who had navigated these waters and knew the currents. His presence was reassuring. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. That even in a room designed to isolate me, allies could be found if you looked closely enough. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the office floor. And in those shadows, I began plotting, not recklessly, not angrily, but with precision. I jotted down notes. Which clients could be leveraged? Which stakeholders were vulnerable? Which colleagues could be persuaded? Every detail, every nuance, mattered. Every slight, every dismissal, every condescending glance from Victor was catalogued, stored for the moment it could be used. I thought of my mother again, of her words echoing in my head, "Latoya. They will try to dim your light. Don't let them." I had felt dimmed today. Yes, but the fire inside me had not only survived, it had grown. And now, it was being sharpened into a weapon. Malik leaned closer. "You're thinking bigger than this office, aren't you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I closed my eyes for a brief moment, imagining the coming weeks, the subtle moves, the leverage, the eventual confrontation. Yes, I was thinking bigger, much bigger. "Yes," I finally said, voice steady, "bigger than this. This is just the beginning." And with that, I turned back to my screen, fingers flying over the keyboard, drafting the first outlines of what would become more than strategy. It would become accountability. I wasn't going to just survive in this environment. I was going to bend it, reshape it, make it serve not just me, but the people like me who had been ignored, underestimated, silenced. The office lights dimmed as the evening drew on, but I remained, alone in the quiet, fully alive in the intensity of my plan. The air around me seemed to pulse with possibility. I could almost feel it, the shift coming. Slow and deliberate, like a storm forming on the horizon. And I was ready. Ready to observe, ready to calculate, ready to act. Because in this game, victory wouldn't come from anger or confrontation, it would come from precision, patience, and timing. And I intended to master all three. I woke the next morning with a clarity that felt almost electric. The city outside my window was alive with the usual chaos, honking horns, street vendors calling out their wares, the low hum of construction crews punctuating the rhythm of Midtown. But I was detached from it, elevated somehow, seeing it through the lens of purpose. Today was the day I made my first move. Victor didn't know it yet, but his overconfidence was about to meet its match. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, heels clicking against polished marble like a metronome marking the start of something inevitable. My colleagues were still trickling in, bleary-eyed, unaware that the quiet tension in the air was my doing, though they would feel its ripple before long. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, reviewing my notes from yesterday. Emails drafted, potential allies identified, small vulnerabilities catalogued. Every move I made yesterday was preparation. Today, it became action. Victor appeared in the doorway of the main conference room, flanked by his usual entourage, exuding that smug aura he wore like armor. I let my gaze linger just long enough to make him sense my presence, then turned back to my work, pretending he was invisible. A subtle game of chess was unfolding, and I was already 3 moves ahead. The first opportunity came faster than I expected. An internal memo regarding a client pitch, one Victor had delegated to one of his favorite team members, had a critical error buried in the fine print. It was the kind of oversight that, if brought to light subtly, could embarrass him without raising immediate alarms. I drafted a concise, professional email, forwarding the memo to the client with a corrective note framed as, "just to clarify some details before the meeting." I hit send, fingers trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. The first domino had been set into motion. Moments later, I heard the commotion outside the conference room. Victor's voice, sharp and panicked, carried through the thin office walls. He was realizing the error, and my email was quietly shifting the blame without anyone suspecting me. Malik appeared at my side, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "You did that clean, almost surgical," he said, whispering so no one else could hear. I allowed a small smile, one that spoke of satisfaction without arrogance. Clean is necessary. Subtlety is power, I whispered back. But the first move wasn't just about correcting an error. It was about sowing the seeds of accountability. Victor had relied on fear and intimidation to maintain control. By exposing a small crack in his facade without attacking him directly, I was letting him, and everyone else, see that the kingdom he'd built on manipulation was not as solid as he thought. By mid-morning, the office was buzzing. Whispers of the memo's correction were everywhere. Victor's face had shifted from smug confidence to cautious calculation. He didn't know I had orchestrated it, but he could feel the tremor. And that tremor, I knew, would grow. During lunch, I strategically approached a few colleagues, casually mentioning the memo and its correction. I framed it as curiosity, as if I was merely observing the chain of events. Their reactions were telling. Surprise, relief, even a hint of admiration. They didn't know the truth, but they were beginning to see someone capable of subtle power. Someone who didn't need to yell or posture to command influence. Returning to my desk, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of strategy executed perfectly. I could see the narrative forming. I was no longer just another employee. I was a force within this ecosystem. Quietly reshaping it, moving pieces that others didn't even realize existed. Victor, of course, began his subtle retaliation. A pointed remark in the team meeting. A dismissive comment when my name was mentioned. The occasional undermining glance. But I was ready. I documented each interaction meticulously, cataloging them in my private file. Evidence, patterns, leverage. Every slight was stored, every misstep noted. And with each one, my strategy grew sharper, more precise. By late afternoon, I took a brief walk to clear my mind. The city streets were alive. People rushing to catch trains. Cars crawling through traffic. I felt a strange kinship with the chaos around me. It mirrored the storm I was orchestrating within the office. And yet, unlike the randomness of the streets, my actions had intention. My moves were deliberate, calculated, unstoppable. Back at my desk, a new email awaited me. A message from a higher-up, praising my attention to detail on the client memo. They had no idea it was part of a larger plan. But the recognition was mine. Quietly claimed, a subtle shift in perception that would echo in future interactions. I leaned back, letting the moment sink in. The first move had been made. Quietly, cleanly, but unmistakably. Victor had felt it. The office had felt it. I had felt it. And the feeling was intoxicating. Not because of triumph, but because it was proof that strategy and patience could bend reality in ways raw emotion never could. That evening, as I packed up my bag, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about Victor or the office. This was about reclaiming agency. About asserting presence in spaces that had historically tried to minimize voices like mine. Every small victory, every subtle maneuver, was a step toward a larger reckoning, not just for me, but for anyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Malik caught up with me as we exited the building. "You're just getting started," he said, a knowing smile on his face. "Yes," I replied, my own smile barely restrained. "Just getting started. And when this is done, it won't just be about correcting one person. It will be about changing the game entirely." The city lights shimmered around us, reflecting off the glass towers. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of inevitability. The storm I was building within the office was quiet now. Invisible to most, but it was real, and when it broke, it would leave nothing unchanged. I walked toward the subway. Every step deliberate, every breath measured. The first move had been executed flawlessly. But the game was far from over. And I, Latoya, had only just begun. The next morning, the office was already buzzing before I even set foot in it. The hum of conversation, the clacking of keyboards, the muted argument over a coffee machine. It was the soundtrack of power waiting to shift. And I, Latoya, was ready to move beyond singular victories. Today wasn't about one email or one correction. It was about creating a network. An invisible web that would support the reckoning I was orchestrating. I started with Malik. His loyalty had been quiet but steadfast, and I needed him aligned with the rhythm of my plan. "Morning," I said casually as I passed his desk, the kind of greeting that seemed routine but carried subtle weight. "Morning, Latoya," he replied, eyes flicking up with a mix of curiosity and caution. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough. "I think it's time we stop reacting and start directing. There's more at play here than Victor realizes. We can't let him run unchecked." Malik nodded slowly. "I've noticed, but aligning everyone quietly, that's tricky." "Tricky isn't impossible," I said, letting a small smile curve my lips. "We'll start small. Pick your allies carefully. Observe, document, influence." By mid-morning, I had discreetly approached a few colleagues, strong, respected, but overlooked voices. I framed our conversation as casual mentoring, sharing observations about office dynamics and client relations. Each word was chosen deliberately, planting seeds of awareness and solidarity. They didn't know it yet, but I was offering them something rare, a way to reclaim agency in a space that often marginalized their voices. The subtlety was essential. Too much too soon would trigger defensiveness or suspicion. At lunch, I met with Simone, a senior analyst whose intellect was sharp but whose confidence had been eroded by years of dismissive superiors. I leaned across the table, voice low, conspiratorial. "Simone, I've noticed something. Victor thrives on distraction, on fear, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can shift the energy. Together." She hesitated, eyes darting around the cafeteria, then leaned closer. "You really think that's possible?" "I don't think. I know," I said, the weight of conviction in my tone impossible to ignore. "We move strategically, subtly. Every small alignment counts. And trust me, once we gain momentum, the impact is undeniable." That afternoon, as I returned to my desk, I felt the thrill of empowerment. My web was forming, threads connecting colleagues who had felt isolated, underestimated, or silenced. Each connection strengthened the unseen network of influence I was building. Victor, of course, was beginning to sense change. His once comfortable dominion now had fissures he couldn't immediately name. A glance at a team member, a hesitation before assigning a task, subtle recalculations in his tone. He was feeling the first tremors of accountability. I documented everything, every observation, every interaction, every flicker of awareness in my allies. Patterns would be my ammunition, and the office was now the canvas for my strategic art. Late that afternoon, I paused by the window, watching the city below. The streets teemed with life, anonymous yet interconnected, people crossing paths, exchanging glances, sharing unspoken understanding. It mirrored my plan. Individuals, when aligned and conscious, could shift the larger system quietly but irrevocably. My phone buzzed. A message from Malik. "They're noticing. Subtle, strong. Keep weaving." I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Every interaction, every whispered insight, every casual suggestion was a deliberate stroke in a painting only I could see in full. And the beauty of it was that no one could accuse me of anything. They only felt the shift. The rebalancing of power. By evening, I had compiled a private memo of potential allies, noting strengths, weaknesses, and the nuances of their influence. I didn't just want loyalty, I wanted active, conscious participation in the recalibration of the office ecosystem. And then it hit me. Empowerment was contagious. Every colleague who found their voice, even in subtle ways, became a catalyst. I realized that my mission extended beyond Victor, beyond me. It was about transforming the culture itself. A whisper of courage here, a gentle nudge there, a visible act of competence unnoticed by the tyrant. These were the seeds of change. As I shut down my laptop, I drafted a brief internal reflection, almost like a journal entry. For myself, leadership isn't about authority. It's about awakening the courage in others. Quietly, deliberately, so that the system bends toward fairness. Malik caught up with me again, his expression a mixture of excitement and caution. "You really think we can change things?" "Yes," I said, looking out the window at the neon-lit skyline. "Not overnight, not with one person, but with awareness, strategy, and subtle alliances, We can create a force that even Victor can't ignore. And the best part? Everyone who joins us feels like they've always been capable. They just needed someone to help them see it. As we exited the building, I sent a mental message to anyone watching. Sometimes the smallest moves create the largest ripples. Watch carefully, act deliberately, and empower those around you. The game is bigger than one person. It's about creating a legacy of strength and fairness. And here's the subtle CTA. Embedded naturally. If you've ever felt underestimated at work, notice who's in your corner and who isn't. Start small. Align with one person today and see the ripple. Share this story if it resonates. You never know who might need to see that quiet courage can change everything. The night air wrapped around us, crisp with possibility. I knew the coming days would test our patience and resolve. But the foundations were laid. Allies were aligned. Momentum was gathering. And Victor's empire of fear was quietly, inexorably, beginning to crack. Latoya wasn't just surviving. Latoya was strategizing. Latoya was leading. The tension in the office was palpable the next morning. The kind that settles like thick fog before a storm. I could feel it in the shuffle of papers. The quiet tapping of keyboards. The nervous laughter that seemed louder than usual. Victor, blissfully unaware of the alliances forming in the shadows, strode through the corridor, his usual swagger a little less assured. I paused near the printer, my hand brushing over a stack of reports, pretending to be absorbed, but my mind was calculating, rehearsing every word, every gesture, every pause I might need in the coming confrontation. I had gathered evidence, subtle yet irrefutable, emails, project mismanagement, a trail of favoritism and exclusion. Today, I would not just react. I would confront. Victor passed by, smirking, and I felt a flicker of resolve. He had underestimated me for too long. Later, in the conference room, he called the weekly project update meeting. The room was tight, the fluorescent lights harsh, and every seat was occupied by someone who was now subtly aware. Subtly aligned, subtly ready. Malik and Simone sat a few chairs apart, sharing a glance that said more than words ever could. "We're with you." Victor opened his laptop, the glow reflecting off his polished shoes. "All right, let's get started. We need efficiency, accountability, results." He didn't see me standing, quietly confident, ready to disrupt the narrative he had tried to control for months. "Victor," I interrupted, voice steady, cutting through the white noise of the room like a scalpel. "I need to address some critical issues regarding project management and team communication." A subtle pause rippled across the room. Victor's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation masked behind practiced composure. "Go ahead," he said, trying to assert control. I exhaled slowly, measuring my words. Over the past quarter, I've documented multiple instances where team members were overlooked. Deadlines were manipulated, and communications were selectively shared. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect a systemic problem that affects performance and morale. Victor's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I'm—" "Yes," I said, unwavering. "And it's not just about the past. It's about ensuring the future of this team and the integrity of our work." I let my gaze sweep across the room, locking eyes with my colleagues, silently signaling solidarity. They nodded, subtle but firm. For a moment, silence held the room captive. The air felt charged, a taut wire ready to snap. Victor shifted uncomfortably, the first cracks of doubt visible beneath his veneer. "You've been gathering evidence?" he asked, voice low, almost incredulous. "Not just evidence," I replied. "Awareness, accountability, and the support of those who want to see fairness and respect restored." I could see the tension ripple through him. He tried to regain control, shifting tone, attempting humor, deflecting with charm, but the room was no longer blind to his manipulations. Each glance, each subtle reaction from my allies reinforced the truth. The tide was turning. Malik leaned forward, adding, "We've all noticed patterns of favoritism and miscommunication. Latoya is right. This isn't personal. It's about professionalism and fairness." Simone's voice, calm but firm, followed, "And if we don't address it now, it will continue to affect every project, every deadline, every client interaction. We have to hold ourselves accountable." Victor's smirk faltered. I could see the flicker of vulnerability. The realization that his control was not absolute. The room had shifted. Power was no longer concentrated in his hands alone. It had begun to diffuse. Subtly, strategically. I pressed the point, carefully but decisively. Victor, I'm offering a choice. Step into accountability and work with us transparently. Or we escalate this through the proper channels. The choice is yours, but the team's integrity cannot be compromised any longer. He paused, searching faces, scanning the room. His empire of fear had always relied on isolation and intimidation. But now he was outnumbered not by sheer force, but by unity, subtle alliances, and undeniable evidence. Finally, he nodded stiffly, attempting to mask concession as cooperation. Fine, let's review the process. Together. It was not victory, it was the first acknowledgement. But it was enough to ignite momentum. The allies I had nurtured, quietly empowered, now knew their voices mattered. They had seen me take the first step, and the ripple effect was undeniable. After the meeting, Malik approached me quietly. You did it, you set the tone. They can't ignore it now. I exhaled, feeling the weight lift slightly, only to be replaced by the awareness that this was just the beginning. It's not about me, I said softly. It's about all of us. Today, we set a precedent. Tomorrow, we solidify it, and the day after, we transform it into a culture no one can take away. Walking back to my desk, I couldn't resist a subtle message for anyone watching. Anyone in a similar corner of the corporate world. Courage isn't loud, it's deliberate. Sometimes, one confrontation, prepared with care, strategy, and support, can shift an entire environment. Notice who stands with you. Align consciously, and never underestimate the power of quiet, determined action. That evening, as the city lights glimmered outside my office window, I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The first confrontation had been met. The first cracks in Victor's control were visible. And my allies, silent, vigilant, ready, were now active participants in reshaping the narrative. Latoya wasn't just surviving. Latoya was initiating change. And the corporate battlefield, for all its pretense and polished surfaces, had just begun to witness the subtle, unstoppable force of strategic resistance. The following week, the office felt different. There was a tension that buzzed under the fluorescent lights. But it wasn't just fear, it was expectation. People had noticed the shift. The subtle yet undeniable statement I had made in the last meeting. Victor, for the first time, walked with a careful calculation behind his eyes. The illusion of control had begun to crack. I arrived early on Monday, coffee in hand, but this time my preparation went beyond documents. I had strategized every step. Who would speak? How we would present the evidence. The subtle reinforcement of credibility. It wasn't just confrontation, it was public accountability. And it had to be precise, undeniable, and impossible to dismiss. In the conference room, the familiar hum of chatter filled the space. I could see allies exchanging quiet nods, each understanding their role in the unfolding moment. Today wasn't just about Victor. It was about the culture of Blackstone dynamics, the invisible currents of favoritism, exclusion, and silent injustice that had shaped the office for years. Victor entered, briefcase in hand, attempting the same confident stride that had worked for months. But now, every step he took was shadowed by uncertainty. I met his gaze calmly, my voice steady, as I began. Good morning, everyone, I started, letting the pause hang, absorbing the room's attention. Today, we are going to address issues that affect not just one person, not just one department, but the integrity of all our work. I revealed the documents, the emails, the overlooked reports, the selective communications, all the pieces that told a story no one could ignore. But I didn't just present facts, I framed them as a shared responsibility. A collective awakening. Simone stepped forward, calm and articulate. We've all been affected, she said, not by one person alone, but by a system that allowed favoritism and exclusion to go unchecked. This is bigger than any single conflict. Malik added, voice firm, and if we don't act now, if we don't hold ourselves and our leaders accountable, the consequences ripple through every project, every client, Every team member who trusts this company. Victor shifted, the first flickers of defensiveness breaking through his practiced mask. This is a lot to take in, he muttered, but the room was no longer pliable. Every head, every glance, every subtle affirmation from my colleagues reinforced the truth. I leaned in slightly, carefully controlled. Victor, the choice is clear. Transparency, accountability, and reform, or the company's values will be publicly questioned. This isn't about vengeance, it's about the community here. The people who make this company what it is. Their voices deserve to be heard. Their contributions respected. The subtle murmurs of agreement grew louder. People were realizing they had power. Not just in silence but in collective action. It was no longer my fight alone. It had become ours. A movement to reclaim fairness and integrity. Over the next few hours, we outlined actionable reforms, mandatory peer reviews, transparent communication channels, accountability checkpoints for management, and a new system for employee concerns that couldn't be ignored. Victor had to agree, and he did, hesitant, constrained, visibly shaken, but ultimately compliant. The first steps of transformation were in motion. Later, I walked down the corridor, observing the subtle shifts in energy. Conversations were more open, interactions more genuine. The allies I had quietly empowered were now active participants in shaping the environment. There was an undercurrent of pride and empowerment I hadn't anticipated, a sense of shared responsibility that transcended rank or role. That evening, I sent a message to my mentor. We did it. The first cracks of accountability are visible. The team is waking up. Change is possible. Her reply was simple, yet potent. And it's unstoppable now. Keep moving forward. I reflected on the lesson of the day. Change isn't loud, and it isn't immediate. It's the subtle shift in dynamics. The courage to speak. The alignment of allies. The deliberate steps that compound over time. Public accountability is not about humiliation. It's about clarity, fairness, and empowerment. If you see injustice, don't wait. Document, strategize, align. When the moment comes, speak with precision, confidence, and integrity. True change is fueled by courage coupled with community. In the following days, small victories began to accumulate. Team members spoke up more freely. Deadlines were respected. Communications became transparent, and even clients noticed the shift. Victor's influence waned, not obliterated, but recalibrated by the undeniable force of collective accountability. The office, once a place of silent tension and invisible hierarchies, had begun to transform. People were finding their voices, and in finding them, they empowered others. And I realized, as I looked across the room, that my role wasn't to dominate, it was to ignite, to catalyze, to show that even in corporate walls, integrity and community could triumph over fear and favoritism. The night fell outside Blackstone Dynamics. The city lights shimmering, a reflection of the internal glow that comes from the knowledge that change is underway. And for the first time, I felt the weight of my mission, not as a solo battle, but as a shared movement. Latoya wasn't just confronting injustice, she was nurturing a culture where voices mattered, where fairness was tangible, and where the community was unstoppable. The office felt different that morning. I walked through the hallways with a new awareness, the subtle hum of activity blending with a renewed sense of purpose. People greeted each other differently now, not with cautious politeness or fear, but with acknowledgement, with recognition of one another's contributions. It was the invisible yet palpable shift that comes when a system begins to heal from the inside. I took my usual seat by the corner window, coffee in hand, watching the city come alive beneath the morning sun. It had been months since the confrontation with Victor and the public accountability meeting that had shaken the very foundations of Blackstone Dynamics. What followed wasn't instant utopia. Change had to be nurtured, monitored, and reinforced daily, but the seeds were planted, and they were growing. Simone walked past, her energy radiating. She had volunteered to lead the new mentorship program, helping junior employees navigate both corporate challenges and personal development. Malik had reorganized his team with transparency in mind, ensuring that project ownership and recognition were equitable. Each small initiative was a testament to what collective courage could achieve. I reflected on my own journey. I had walked into this building. Once a place that drained me, silenced me, and made me doubt my worth. Now, I saw my impact mirrored in every empowered voice. In every collaborative effort. In every step toward a culture that valued fairness and integrity. Yet, this transformation wasn't just about others, it was about me. Too, I had discovered a resilience I hadn't fully recognized. The power of strategy, patience, and empathy. The weight of responsibility didn't crush me, it sharpened me. I realized that leadership wasn't about dominance, it was about igniting others. Creating conditions where their potential could flourish. A meeting was scheduled for the afternoon, a routine check-in with the senior leadership team. Victor would be there, undoubtedly cautious, aware that the landscape had changed irreversibly. But I was no longer acting out of personal anger or a need to prove something. I was acting out of commitment to a legacy, a workplace where integrity mattered, where voices mattered, where the community mattered. As the meeting progressed, I noticed the subtle differences in interactions. Senior leaders now asked for input before decisions, welcomed dissenting opinions, and acknowledged mistakes without defensiveness. Victor's attempts to dominate conversations were met with calm, informed resistance. The balance of power had shifted, not by confrontation alone, but by consistent application of accountability and transparency. After the meeting, I walked out onto the rooftop terrace. City skylines stretching endlessly. I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. This wasn't the end. Change is never complete. But I had proven something crucial. One person with purpose, clarity, and courage can spark a transformation that ripples outward, impacting countless lives. I reached for my phone and drafted a post on our internal communications platform. Sharing the milestones, the reforms, and the vision ahead. My words were meant to inspire. To remind everyone that they were part of something larger than themselves. We've taken steps toward fairness, transparency, and respect. Let's continue to hold each other accountable, uplift one another, and ensure that this culture doesn't just survive, it thrives. Every voice matters, every action counts. Messages of gratitude poured in from colleagues who had previously felt invisible. They shared stories of mentorship, renewed confidence, and small victories that, collectively, were reshaping the company culture. I felt a surge of pride, not in myself, but in the community we had built together. Later that evening, as I left the office, the streets alive with city lights and evening energy, I realized something profound. Transformation isn't about a single dramatic act, it's about sustained, intentional action, about creating a framework where justice, respect, and integrity are embedded in daily routines, about empowering others to continue the work long after your own steps have passed. I thought about young professionals, Black men and women entering corporate spaces where their voices are too often muted. I thought about the ripple effect our courage could have across industries, across cities, across communities, and I knew that this was bigger than any one company or one confrontation. This was about legacy. Latoya smiled, a quiet, internal acknowledgement of growth, impact, and responsibility. She had been tested, challenged, and forced to navigate treacherous waters. And in the process, she had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Change is powerful. Change is collective. Change requires courage, clarity, and a commitment to community. But once it begins, it is unstoppable. And with that realization, she leaned back, letting the city's energy fill her, letting the possibilities of the future wash over her. CTA for the audience. If you see a system that silences voices, challenge it. If you see injustice, document it. Align with allies. Speak with integrity. Your courage doesn't just transform workplaces, it transforms communities. Share your story, uplift others, and be the spark that ignites lasting change. Latoya's story wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience, leadership, and leaving a legacy that empowered others to rise. Every email, every strategy, every act of courage had built a foundation that no one could dismantle. And as the skyline glimmered in the night, one truth remained. A committed individual can catalyze a movement that changes everything, not just for themselves, but for the entire community.